Thank you so much for being here today. So today we're doing part 2 of our 2025-2026 Symposium series, Starting and Ending Wars, Charting a Course from Conflict Resolution in the 21st Century, which examines the legal and policy challenges surrounding the initiation, conduct, and termination of armed conflict. Last semester we hosted part 1, the first move, presidential power, AUMFs, and legal architecture of starting modern wars, discussing the institution of both traditional and asymmetric conflicts. Today we're going to delve into part 2, the final signature, Peacemaking and Accountability in Conventional and Asymmetric Conflicts. With that, I'd like to hand off the stage to our moderator, NSI's founder and executive director, as well as NSLJ's faculty advisor, Jamil Jaffer.
Thank you. Thanks to Annalise, and thanks to the NSLJ for hosting this event with NSI. And thanks to our panelists for being here. I'm just going to introduce the panelists, and then we'll jump into some questions. And we will have time at the end for audience questions as well, so please be thinking of your questions as we go down this road. So starting to my immediate left is Admiral Mark Montgomery. Admiral Montgomery serves as the Senior Director of the Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where he leads FDD's efforts to advance U.S. prosperity and security through technology innovation while countering cyber threats that seek to diminish them. Admiral Montgomery also directs the Cyberspace Solarium Commission 2.0, an initiative that works to implement the recommendations of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, where he served as Executive Director. Prior to that, he served as Policy Director for the Senate Armed Services Committee under Senator John McCain, and for 32 years in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear-trained surface warfare officer, retiring as a Rear Admiral in 2017. His flying officer assignments included Director of Operations J3 at U.S. PACOM, Commander of Carrier Strike Group 5, embarked on the USS George Washington, stationed in Japan, and many, many other roles, including at the National Security Council from 1998 to 2000. He has graduate degrees from the University of Pennsylvania, University of Oxford, and completed the U.S. Navy's Nuclear Power Training Program. So thanks for being here, Admiral Montgomery. Immediately to Admiral Montgomery's left, but perhaps not generally, is Lester Munson. Lester is the co-head of the International Practice Group at BGR Group, a leading government relations firm in Washington, D.C., where he consults with foreign governments, corporations, and advocacy groups. His work is focused on sovereign clients in the Middle East, Europe, and Latin America. Les leads BGR's foreign assistance practice, who provides advisory and government relations services to companies, advocacy groups, and NGOs. And as a former senior U.S. state official and veteran of multiple congressional committees, Les provides clients with unique knowledge, skills, and abilities to advance their goals. Prior to joining BGR, Les had a 26-year career on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch. He most recently served as the staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he was my immediate boss and tried to fire me multiple times, never successfully. Prior to that, he was chief of staff to Senator Martin Kirk of Illinois, and during his tenure there, Senator Kirk became the leading Republican voice in the Senate on Iran and other national security issues. During the Bush administration, Les served as Deputy Assistant Administrator of USAID, where he focused on legislative affairs as well as global health issues. So thanks for being here, Les, as well. Immediately to Les's left is Tara McFeely. Tara is a senior national security executive with expertise spanning defense, intelligence, and technology policy, political and budgetary domains. She serves currently on the Strategic Advisory Council at the Silverado Policy Accelerator, advising on innovative data-driven national security policy initiatives, and is an adjunct professor in the Master's Program of Foreign Service at Georgetown University's M&A Walsh School of Foreign Service. In government, Tara served as the Republican Deputy Staff Director on the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, driving national security and intelligence policy, and executive branch oversight direction. She also co-led the professional staff, and prior to that served as the SSCI Budget Director. She was also Deputy Director of Intelligence Analysis at the Institute for Defense Analysis, and served at Booz Allen Hamilton. Prior to that, Ms. McFeely began her career serving in the U.S. Navy, initially as a surface warfare officer, conducting U.S. Second Fleet and NATO operations across the Atlantic, and subsequently as a naval intelligence officer supporting operations in the Balkans and the global war on terror. She has a Bachelor of Science degree from the U.S. Naval Academy, where she was a letterwoman on the women's varsity basketball team, and she also has a Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And Les, I'm sorry I didn't mention your background, but Les was a football player at the University of Chicago. And basketball player. There you go. And immediately to Tara's left is Lieutenant General Karen Gibson. Lieutenant General Gibson served immediately prior to her current roles as a Sergeant at Arms of the U.S. Senate. She was the Senate's Chief Law Enforcement Officer in that role. Prior to that, served on active duty in the U.S. Army for over 3 decades, attaining the rank of Lieutenant General. She performed numerous intelligence cyberspace roles, including serving as Deputy Director of National Intelligence for National Security Partnerships, and as the Deputy Commanding General of the U.S. Army Cyber Command. She served as Director of Intelligence for the U.S. CENTCOM as well, the J2, and has a lot of knowledge about what's going on currently in the Iran conflict. And she designed, as Deputy Command General for the U.S. Army Cyber Command, she designed and built their first functional joint forces headquarters for cyber, for synchronizing both offensive and defensive operations in cyberspace. She's led intelligence operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, and East Africa, and among other awards and decorations, she's a recipient of the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal and the Distinguished Superior Service Medal with a combat device. As a Montana native, Ms. Gibson earned her BS degree in Industrial Engineering from Purdue University, an MS in National Security Strategy from the National War College, an MS in Strategic Intelligence from National Intelligence University, and she currently teaches National Security Strategy as an adjunct professor at Georgetown. Is an Exceptional Woman Awardee for 2023. So thanks for being here, General Gibson, as well. All right, so we got an awesome panel, and we're talking about how to end conflict. So we'll just jump right in. And Les, I want to start with you. So you've worked across the legislative and executive branches. So let's talk about interstate conflicts versus conflicts with non-state actors. It's not unusual for Congress to declare war. We've seen them do that in obviously last time in World War II, but they've also authorized authorizations for the use of military force in various conflicts, including the global war on terror and Iraq twice. What do we do when we find a terrorist group and we end the conflict with them? Do we seek to delist them as a foreign terrorist organization? How do we enter into an agreement with the terrorist group to no longer conduct operations against them? Is there such a thing as a peace agreement with the terrorist group? What does that look like in real terms?
Well, that's a lot of questions, Jamil, that you just asked me.
Sorry, I should ask permission to ask you a multi-part debate question.
There's a lot to cover here, and I think thinking holistically here for the last couple of decades, and Jamil and I were in the thick of this on Capitol Hill at least for a few years. There are a ton of questions about authorizing the use of military force, the war powers resolution and its effectiveness, and how that actually plays out in terms of American policymaking and politics. It is a time of, I would say, great change. Many of the things that we think of as integral to the way our government works are not necessarily operative today. Congress hasn't declared war since, I think, 1942, related to World War II. There have been several authorizations for the use of military force since then, but there have been a number of incidents when the U.S. used military force without specific authorization from Congress, including
right now
with respect to Iran.
Wait, well, again, does the president need congressional authorization to conduct the operations he's doing in Iran right now?
This is a great question. Can Congress use its army to stop him from using his army?
The army they don't have.
The army they don't have. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Clear.
The Sergeant General, we have a Sergeant General of the Senate.
I think
there's no congressional military. Okay.
Right. So every president, and maybe particularly this one, in recent memory has used force without congressional authorization.
Every president.
Every president.
Moderate.
President Trump using force in Iran. President Biden. Actually, maybe not President Biden. President Trump. True.
Global war on terror, maybe.
Global war on terror, maybe. Although that's arguably covered by the 9/11 AUMF. President Trump the first time using strikes against Syria because of their use of chemical weapons. President
killing Qasem Soleimani in Iran.
Killing Qasem Soleimani. President Obama in Libya famously in 2011 used force against the Libyan government without any kind of authorization from Congress, didn't even ask for one.
Not in Syria. Or wait, yes in Syria.
Actually did ask for an AUMF for Syria in both 2013 and 2014.
Didn't get it.
Did not get it either time, although we tried hard to give it to him in 2013. Pulling back, the larger point here is the current, what we think of as the current structure is the congressional or the constitutional authority for Congress to declare war, the legislative authority of Congress to authorize the use of military force, Congress's legislation, the War Powers Resolution, which sets up a structure for congressional approval or disapproval of military action. None of those are working as intended.
Well, they almost work. Right? The House almost voted to get the president out of this conflict.
I will argue, and please come at me, the War Powers Resolution has the opposite effect of what it has intended. The opposition, and none of this should be interpreted as my political judgments. I'm trying to be neutral here. Democrats have used the War Powers Resolution to try to stop the war in Iran in both the House and Senate in the last few weeks. In the Senate, they keep doing it like every week. Each time, the resolution...
Our home state senator, Senator Kaine.
Senator Kaine is particularly focused on this issue. The net effect of introducing a resolution of disapproval under the War Powers Resolution for the war in Iran, which then gets defeated, is a double negative. Congress defeats the resolution to disapprove the war, effectively approving the war. So Democrats, as the opposition party, bring up issues on the floor using special authorities under the law in the War Powers Resolution structure to force a vote on a resolution of disapproval, which effectively, in my mind, puts Congress in favor of the war. It is the opposite of what was intended by the War Powers.
So Terry, you served on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and this is where a lot of this action is taking place, is in the Senate. So one, is less right, is a failure to disapprove a war the same as tacitly approving it? I don't think that's true, but one, what do you think about that? And then second, look, wars with nation states end with treaties and agreements. We had the Treaty of Versailles, we had, the Treaty of Berlin, although, not really. What role, if any, should Congress play in ending a conflict with a non-state actor? Should Congress play any role? Should there be no role? Should there be agreements? If there are agreements, should Congress have some oversight of them? What's Congress's role in ending a war or a conflict, or authorize use of military force with a non-state actor, like Syria, for example? The ISIS in Syria.
In Syria. So I'm going to lump that a little bit together and step back a little bit and just look at Congress's role in authorizing things and how that plays out. And so it's essentially winding that back. And when you look at Congress, what's important to note is Congress is a political institution. So that's an overarching driver in everything that Congress does or fails to do. And as we're seeing and talking about the House and Senate on the Democrat side, currently making efforts to relate to the War Powers Resolution and the current activities in Iran. And so the key questions when we think about Congress's role in all of these things is what Congress should do, what Congress can do, and what Congress will do. And I think as we look at all of these matters across history, those are some of the key ways we can frame Congress's action, and often Congress's inaction. And so to get to your, essentially the first point in terms of disapproving something, where we often see, and we're seeing this increasingly over the past several decades, is Congress is not acting. So is it disapproving something by failing to act, or is it a reflection of those broader issues in the political environment in which Congress is currently operating? I'd say it's a little bit of both. And increasingly, as we've seen, the extension of executive power and increasing authority for presidential executive power really growing largely after September 11th and the AUMS and the authority that was given to the president. So by Congress not acting, often that's a tacit approval, and that's what we're seeing right now as well, specifically related to Iran. In terms of the role of non-state actors and where Congress can assert a role or not a role, again, looking at on the authorization side and looking at the post-9/11 environment, Congress spends a lot of time and resources looking at these matters from an oversight perspective. What is the executive branch doing? And doing that through different mechanisms, through hearings, through investigations where necessary, through travel. Members of Congress and staff travel globally to assess how the executive branch is executing U.S. foreign policy, but also to meet with our partners and allies and other entities to assess what is working and isn't working in those areas. And so the last piece that Congress do is a key role, and we kind of scrambled across the table here, is the appropriations process and the funding process. And so where do the funds come into this activity as well? And we'll see this play out as we look at as the Iran conflict goes on, and the supplemental request for funding and other things as well. So those are in terms of what Congress, should, can, and will do, is looking in that structure. In terms of interacting with non-state actors, this is where it gets a little bit nebulous. And we're seeing this particularly with Syria and with the former head of one of the largest terrorist organizations, al-Nusra, now running the state.
Literally Al-Qaeda.
Yes, exactly.
Now running Syria. Now coming and visiting the White House in a suit.
And where has Congress been in that? I think tracking and looking at, sort of what activities they were involved in, but you don't see extension of executive.
Doing nothing.
Congress asserting its role in this particular matter.
I see. I don't want to jump.
I want to answer the question you put at the very beginning about what's their role in that conflict termination, and the answer is 0.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's be clear. Whether or not they were asked to start it, through an AUMF
Right.
or a War Powers Resolution, December 8th declaration of war. At the end game, we don't. That's not how we work.
But that's
The
not true,
president
right?
is
I mean,
given-
historically, we've had treaties to end nation-state conflicts.
Yeah.
Why not in the case of non-state actors?
So the negotiation of the termination is done completely by the executive
Sure,
branch.
the negotiation of everything is done by the executive branch.
Yeah, but that's the end of the war. The treaty confirmation is a given on our end, and if you look back, it's been a given. And so, to the degree that we've done them, which we haven't, we haven't
for a while.
done since Korea, and even I don't even think the Korean armistice was
No.
confirmed by the
That's
Senate. My point on this is, they're not agile enough to be involved in this, and they shouldn't be.
They shouldn't.
You
Okay, that's
delegate it to
right.
them, and you delegate it to a mix of military and civilian political leadership, state and defense departments to negotiate this. The involvement of the vice president's unusual in my
Yeah.
mind, but and by the way, was unnecessary, and now he has to come to every one of them because
You mean with
the decision was
respect to Iran and the
Iran,
negotiation
right,
in
no,
Pakistan?
I mean,
He
that was
wasn't
a-
doing anything else.
Yeah, so keep them out of Hungarian and Bulgarian elections.
It's not a winning
but my
play.
answer to that question is no, they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Whether they're involved, whether in the end there's a treaty that they sign, that goes beyond conflict termination. That's usually the establishment of the new operating order.
Right.
And sometimes a treaty is required for them.
Okay, in 1 second, Les, let me just go ahead, unless you want to jump in real quick. I'll come to
One quick thought, the Boland Amendment in the early 80s, which sought to...
You're dating yourself, Lester.
I know. Also have to teach this tomorrow night. The Boland Amendment, which restrained the ability of the president to fund the Contras in Nicaragua in the early 80s,
Which he ignored.
which changed every year and was a rider on an appropriations bill,
And he ignored.
was a very difficult way for Congress to try to end a conflict and produced all kinds of trouble. Nevertheless, it is a plausible mechanism for Congress to defund an effort if it so chooses. Also, you might point at the effort at the end of Vietnam when Congress did prevent the president from funding
Which is
any
actually
kind of
what
further
did bring
activities in
Vietnam to
Vietnam.
an end, to be fair, right? So General Gibson, what about that? I mean, so even though you served in uniform for 33 years, you might have from that perspective, you also served in the Senate as the Sergeant at Arms most recently. Do you think Congress can or should have a role in conflict termination generally, nation states or otherwise? And then secondly, in particular, in non-nation state conflicts. And then last, let's assume whether or not Congress has a role. How do we measure whether a terrorist group is ready to, be sort of rehabilitated and come to power? I mean, obviously we have a situation with al-Nusra where their leader came into the, sort of inherited the state because he won. We've sort of acceded to that. It seems crazy, given that we're still in theory at war with Al-Qaeda.
Okay, that's about 5 questions, so I have to stop you because
stop.
I only remember 2 of those already. And I'm with Mark, that it's not Congress that decides that the conflict is over, although they do have levers of influence, specifically funding or the authorization of like an AUMF. But it's conditions on the ground and a decision by the executive branch. And by conditions on the ground, that can be battlefield conditions, or in the case of Iran, it better be a negotiated settlement of some kind, which has enforcement mechanisms and an inspection regime that somehow ensures that Iran is not going to procure a nuclear weapon. That should be the determination that that conflict is over, not Congress or the price of gas or something.
I'm going to come back to you on that.
Okay,
Keep going.
okay. So in terms of, from my own experience, I was the director of intelligence for the Defeat ISIS campaign in Iraq and Syria, and that was pretty straightforward because they were a non-state actor, but they were acting like a state.
They had territory.
They had territory, they taxed people, they had a justice system, they were providing social services, and you liberate a city through the use of military force, and now another entity is providing that governance.
Yeah.
And so there was not a need to negotiate with them. We liberated most of northern Syria and Iraq got them down to a small nest of hardened ideological fanatics that wouldn't surrender down in the Baghouz Cliffs in the middle of the Euphrates River Valley, and most of them ended up in refugee camps in Iraq and Syria. Now they're all in Iraq. And there was no need to negotiate anything because they were no longer in charge. I would submit it was also the same with the Taliban in Afghanistan. You know, the Taliban were governing. We came in together with partners from NATO and elsewhere, applied military force, threw them out, installed the Karzai government.
And now they're back.
Yeah, and now they're back. But it did not require a treaty or a negotiated settlement with the Taliban when they were replaced.
Would that have been better? Would we be in a different place if we had negotiated some sort of an agreement with them?
I don't think they. I don't think they were.
They weren't interested in negotiating.
No, they weren't. They were more interested to go live in caves or villages and come back.
And neither were we.
Right. Yes. So I think though a couple of things. So I just outlined on this spectrum of non-state actors some pretty clear cut. It's easy to see we have won,
Right.
you know, in Mosul or Raqqa or wherever, and they are no longer in charge. Other things like the global war on terror. I mean, when is that over? That's. I mean, even the AUMF for Iraq it took over 20 years. It just canceled with the 2026 NDAA, and we have not been conducting combat operations in Iraq for years. So
Except for those occasional strikes on ISIS facilities, and once in a while, some Iraqi
occasional,
general on the ground in some airport.
right. So I think another example we could use is, you know, how long will we strike gunboats in the Caribbean? That kind of falls in this other kind of amorphous, non-state, the use of violent state power against non-state actors. And then one other way, I realize this is not related to your question, but I would point out a difference when we're dealing with non-state actors, because it is a legal distinction, and that has to do with, are they going to be treated as prisoners or detainees?
Right.
And that's a very important distinction on the ground in particular, and has led to, you know, consequences like, you know, extended internment at Gitmo, which is probably not what would happen if these had been conflicts with state combatants protected by the Geneva Convention.
Yeah. So, Admiral Montgomery, there's, you know, one of the things that we think about as we're talking about dealing with terrorist groups is, you know, there might be rogue factions, right? You might even find a way forward. Think about the sort of Israeli agreement with the Palestinian Authority to have the PLO become the PA and Fatah sort of become less relevant, become a party within that group, and then a sort of negotiated agreement. You control this land, we'll have some oversight of it, but you know you've got some run room. That's changed over time, obviously. But how do we think about splinter factions like Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas, who then may take territory, may continue to conduct attacks? Even parts of the government itself that's been recognized might endorse terrorist activities or other things. How do we think about objectively measuring compliance with organizations like that are being rehabilitated at some level, but still have factions within them that might be problematic?
You know, I think the factions are held accountable for the action they take. You know, your response is proportionate to the action they take, but you have to focus that on the splinter group. For the main group, you attempt to continue to treat them as you agreed to in whatever agreement. Now, there is a temporal nature to this.
Yeah.
If it goes on, like, I think after the ceasefire 9 days ago or 8 days ago, 10 days ago now, there was firing for about 36 hours. And
You're talking about the Iran ceasefire.
The Iran ceasefire. And our presumption was we'd so jacked up their C2, their command and control, that they couldn't get word to some of these units.
The IRGC out in the field.
The IRGCs out in the field, so that we accepted that for about, and it did go away.
Yeah.
And had we begun proportionate attacks against that, it would have not gone away, right? It would have, it would have kiboshed the temporary ceasefire. So my gut reaction is you treat splinter groups who are clearly operating, you know, not in that temporal example I just gave, as their own entity.
Okay.
And then you treat the main group that you're trying to make a deal with separate from that as long as you can. Now, if your intelligence tells you that they are encouraging that, you know, that they're using them as proxies, then you hold everyone accountable at a proportionate rate.
I see Joe gives one jump in here, and I'm going to push for both of you, but go ahead, please.
I would just say, whether they're a splinter group or not, whether it was, due to degraded command and control or not, the decision whether a ceasefire is holding or not is a policy decision. It is one that policymakers decide this is no longer working. Because pot shots across a battlefield, whether it's a guy with a rifle or, mortar rounds, that's not uncommon in a ceasefire. And it's a policy decision to say this is holding despite what's happening or not.
So can I ask you guys both a question, General Gibson and Admiral Montgomery? So we have had a ceasefire in place with Iran for now. I think we're on the last day of the ceasefire in theory, but it doesn't look like Iran's held up its end of the bargain. We've stopped attacking Iran. The Strait of Hormuz has not been open not one day during this 14-day window. At what point?
Again, that's a policy decision.
No, I agree. It's a policy decision, not a legal discussion. But at what point does the United States say, you're not keeping up your end of the bargain, we're out, bombing restarts?
I'll start by saying that probably next time bring staff to the meeting, like a maritime lawyer who can help you
figure out what a blockade is.
Well, and also explain what innocent and transit passage are of international waterways, and so you have an actual stated agreement. Because it was obvious within about 2 to 3 hours at the end of that both sides interpreted
what had been agreed.
What opening the Strait of Hormuz meant. I get that there's a disagreement on enriched uranium. That disagreement was an actual disagreement at the meeting where we thought 5 or they thought 5 years, we thought 10, whatever it was. The Strait of Hormuz was, they literally, I'm confident J.D. Vance texted, called, signal group the president that he had a war
fist bump, American flag, fire emoji.
That the Iranians had agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz. And then the president went into social media. And the Iranians' vision of opening the Strait of Hormuz was, we're going to open the Strait of Hormuz to all the ships that we like.
Yeah, all the Chinese ships.
And all the ships, all the Shadow Fleet ships can go through. And the ones of the belligerent, what they actually described was no warships, which they can't stop anyway, but also no merchant ships from belligerents, which meant, I thought, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, and what that meant was... So there was not
a meeting of the mind.
Yeah, there was a misdefinition. There was a misunderstanding of the definition of opening the Strait of Hormuz. This is important because this is why peace negotiations, I think we're at Panmunjom for like 14 months or something, right? I mean, it took a while to nail down the details of the peace treaty between not a peace treaty, but the cessation of hostilities between us and the North Koreans and Chinese. And so I only say it in the context of you need to have professionals there. Steve Witkoff is I don't know what the opposite of professional is. Amateur, I guess.
Wow.
Steve Witkoff, he's beyond amateur.
But he solved like 8 world conflicts.
He has solved 0 world conflicts, and the only thing I think he's done is pay homage to Vladimir Putin repeatedly. So no, he's not a professional. Vance is not a professional. Kushner's not a professional.
But Vance is at least a lawyer.
I'm not. I'll say right here, I'm not a lawyer, and I think being a lawyer, this is not a lawyer. I have a lawyer that handles my taxes. I don't expect him to solve my maritime law problem, right? I'm pretty sure he's not a maritime lawyer, or even an international law lawyer.
Right.
But I'll go further and say, we have one other problem, which is that 2 of the 3 people negotiating for us have conflicts of interest with investments in the companies. In the countries, the Arab countries that are part of this discussion, and that's just not. That's why you use State Department professionals, and we have laws about where they can invest, what they can do. It's open to the government. We have real problem. This is a very, very bad team on the U.S. side, and they're still better than the Iranian team.
Bad negotiators, ethically problematic.
Yes. You want to throw another one in? I mean, unqualified technically. So I'll give you all 3: unqualified technically, bad negotiators, and conflicted.
That is the sort of 3 strikes.
And the 4th one I'll say for Vance is, it's hard to come off of him. Right? In other words, if he makes a bad deal, only one person can disagree.
He's like Vice President of the United States.
Yeah, and when he makes a bad deal, only one person can undo it. And what are we going to Trump come to the next group? I'm sorry,
he did say, to be fair, he did say he might go to Pakistan.
That's what's going to happen.
So-
That would be, well, okay, then I will redouble my accusation that that's a completely unqualified negotiating team then.
So Joe, I do less than Tara. I don't want to get you here, but Joe, do you want? No, okay. So let me ask you. So one of the things that
Do I understand you don't want to sit here and criticize the president? No, I'm joking.
No, I have nothing further to add.
Okay.
So Les, one of the ways that sort of war making and frustrations or unhappiness at the state level come out when it comes to both nation states and non-state actors often comes in the form of economic penalties, right? Sanctions. And we've seen that as a negotiating tactic. We've seen it as a pressure tactic. We've seen it as a substitute for armed conflict for many years. How do we think about that in conflict termination, right? So we're talking about the negotiations are ongoing with Iran right now. There's debates about, will they open the strait? Will they not? There's debates about whether they'll engage in nuclear enrichment or not. There's also debate about whether we'll remove sanctions on them or not. When should sanctions be removed? How do we know when the time is right? Is it temporary for a while? Is it permanent over time? And if the sanctions were imposed by Congress, can the executive branch remove them permanently without Congress taking action?
Folks, these were coded questions to get me to talk about the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act.
Never heard of it.
Well done, Professor Jaffer. So I have lots of views. On sanctions, there's a bunch of interesting parts of the mechanics of international economic sanctions. The president generally has a waiver on the implementation of sanctions that is given to him by Congress. So the president is essentially told by Congress, you will make a determination as to whether a bad thing has happened by, let's say, Iran, and then if you make such a determination, you shall impose the following sanctions on Iran or Iranian entities. And by the way, we will give you a waiver to lift those sanctions. And the three kind of standard thresholds are national interest, national security interest, and critical national security interest, as memory serves, all of which are to be defined basically by the president. The president has used a similar waiver system.
And they're temporary. They have to be renewed oftentimes.
And they are temporary and often like 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and have to be renewed. An example would be the Congress and the president imposed sanctions on Cuba in 1996 through the Libertad Act or the Helms-Burton Law, provided for a right of action, a sanction against foreign nationals and companies that had invested in Cuba using stolen property expropriated by the Cuban government. That right of action was waived by the president for 20 years. Every 6 months for 20 years, 4 different presidents waived that sanction.
But not pursuant to an agreement with Cuba.
Not pursuant to an agreement. But point being, the president has a lot of latitude given to him specifically by Congress to implement sanctions in a certain way. Now, that Congress, again, and this is, I think, what you're getting to, Congress, in many cases, originates the sanctions regime. In Iran, for Iran in particular, it was Congress pushing for a tough sanctions regime on Iran. Almost invariably, the president, whoever it was, said, no, please don't make me do that. I'm not interested in having that sanctions authority. And then Congress would pass it 100-0 in the Senate and 420-0 in the House.
And the president would say, I won't put Congress on that deal.
Yeah, it was like, oh, okay, I'll do these sanctions. So the Congress had a role in the kind of the authorship of the sanctions. When the JCPOA came out,
This is the Iran nuclear
the
deal.
Iran nuclear deal, which was not signed, was not an agreement even. It was a joint comprehensive plan of action. It was not even close to being a treaty. Called for the lifting of sanctions on Iran in exchange for certain limits on Iran's nuclear weapons program.
Enrichment program.
Congress responded by passing the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, overwhelmingly, bipartisanly, which suspended the president's ability to waive sanctions until such time as Congress had the opportunity to review the terms that the administration had agreed to with Iran.
And vote on it.
And then vote on it. And also ran into the same problem the War Powers Resolution has, which a resolution of disapproval was not approved, thus making it appear that Congress had kind of in a left-handed way approved the deal.
No.
Yes, now you say no before you said actually.
No, I always say.
So, point being, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. A lot of this stuff starts to break down if there's not overwhelming support in Congress in a bipartisan way for a certain approach, because the president can veto things, and it's very, very difficult to override the veto.
So, Tara, one of the things that happens with these sanctions that Les is talking about is when they're directed at states, you may have a lot of funding available, right? So take the case of Ukraine, right? We've sanctioned Russia now since 2013, since the first invasion of Crimea. We've got a ton of money from that. When they invaded Ukraine a second time, we sanctioned them some more through I forget what it's called, but this CATSA, and we brought in a whole bunch of money. There's a bunch of money sitting frozen in European bank accounts, in American bank accounts, Russian oligarch money and the like. And now there's talk about not giving that money back to Russia, even if we enter into an agreement with them, because they have obviously bombed the living daylights out of Ukraine. And there's advocates in Europe and a lot in the United States also that say that money should be used for Ukraine reconstruction. How should we be thinking about sort of sovereign money, the money of sovereign nation, and their responsibility for a conflict, and whether that's simply punitive or in fact that's an appropriate use of war termination authorities to say, hey, look, you engaged in this thing, you've now got to enter into a settlement, we're going to use your frozen money to rebuild the country you destroyed.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic right now, and as on that particular issue, as other Europeans are coming along on that issue and seeing the potential value of using those funds for to assist efforts in Ukraine, is I would argue that the greater the consensus in something like that gets to the sovereignty issue.
So if you get enough winners on the right side, like our team on board, we can impose sort of winner's justice.
I mean, that's how war is too, right?
Yeah.
Whoever wins, right, that's who decides, right? And we can look at the history of that over centuries, generally. In terms of the outcome, we can look at the creation of the United Nations and all of NATO structure otherwise, and U.S. control of NATO, I mean, all those things as well. So looking at that in terms of having a greater consensus around that for the long term could, in this particular case, build a platform in which it could be sustained.
What happens when it's a push, the way that sort of Ukraine looks like it's going to end up? Russians have won some, they've taken territory inside a sovereign country, they did it before in Crimea. This thing looks like if it does settle, it's going to settle with the Russians taking some amount of Ukrainian territory. We're going to force them to pay essentially for that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think you're looking where does that go, and what's the ends to that, and or what other degrees of accountability are there for Russia? I think, right? This is one tool, one thing, resources we can tap into.
And can Congress? Sorry, no, keep going, please.
But can Congress do that?
Can Congress force it upon the president when he's negotiating these deals? Can Congress push the president?
I mean, I think it gets to all of those issues in terms of Congress asserting its role in foreign affairs and how we're seeing that, and who is Congress, as Mark's point earlier, is 535 members, politically elected members. So much of that is the timing of when these events are happening. Foreign affairs issues generally don't resonate with the voting public, and so, you know, for individual members, what's for them to push for that? So who are the leaders, I think the question is, in Congress who could drive something like that? We can look at history back, and if we look at the Vietnam War and some of the focus on that, there were hearings, aggressive oversight hearings, that at the time Fulbright led, and really raised awareness and raised public awareness of these issues. So if there's a role for Congress, you know, is where do they gain the public momentum for some of it?
Put that pressure on. So speaking of the voting public, I should note that today is election day in Virginia. There's a constitutional vote on the ballot. People, to the extent you're Virginia voters, please go out and vote. We have a few more minutes.
What's that? Wait till we're done.
Well, yeah, you don't have to go right this minute. Please do go vote if you're a Virginia voter. We got a few more minutes. I do want people, by the way, in the audience thinking about questions, so we will come to you out in the audience for more questions. But I want to pivot a little bit from what Tara was talking about and less about these sanction regimes, and talk about sort of post-conflict and post-settlement. General Gibson, oftentimes we set up tribunals to adjudicate, you know, justice over the people that have engaged in the wartime activities. We had the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, we had the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. You've got things like the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court. All these organizations have sought to get involved in conflicts either as they're ongoing. We see that what the ICJ has been trying to do with respect to the Gaza conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, or rather Israel and Hamas. How should we think about these sort of post-war bodies? Do we need them? Are they helpful? What's the right structure for setting them up?
So I think also there have been some prosecutions in European courts, not the ICC or ICJ, well, perhaps in the ICJ also, but in some European courts of people involved in the war in Syria, whether they were part of the Assad regime, or then I think some Europeans who had supported ISIS who are being prosecuted in European courts. You know, I like your expression, Tara, winner's justice. I think we're fine with that as long as it's not us that's being prosecuted. You know, now we're talking about, I think most of those have been for, well, I really had been thinking about this more from the standpoint of how we ensure that our own service members are not committing war crimes, which we do have. We self-police. We don't, our troops are not subject because we have not signed on to those international bodies that would prosecute those.
We signed the Rome Treaty on the International Criminal Court, but never ratified.
Right, but we abide by the law of armed conflict and the Geneva Convention, and we self-police, and we have a long history of prosecuting, trying by court-martial, and sentencing service members for gross violations. Abu Ghraib scandal was one. Sergeant First Class Bales, who walked off a fob and killed a bunch of innocent people. I would point out, I guess I'm jumping on Mark's bandwagon here, it is not useful when the executive overturns those military judgments and grants presidential pardons. I think this Uniform Code of Military Justice is a tremendous, to call it a plank that underpins discipline within the armed forces would be an understatement. And it erodes that command authority when those kinds of crimes are pardoned after a court-martial.
Joe, can I see one?
Admiral Government, I agree with General Gibson, and as she's referring to in Trump 45, near the end, he overturned 2 or 3 convictions of UCMJ convictions, actually court-martial convictions of Americans who committed war crimes in OEF and OAS.
There's some pretty serious ones, killing civilians.
Yeah, and I'll go one further and say I appreciated the comments on winner's justice, because if you think about the end of World War II, we searched for, arrested, indicted, convicted, and then hung, I think 3 submarine captains, 2 Japanese and 1 German, who we felt machine gunned survivors in the water.
Yeah.
And I'll say gently, this administration, has taken the opposite approach to that long-standing precedent. Which is
machine gunning people
in the water. I have to say, like, my son's an ensign. He's a dum-dum, right? That's the lowest rank of officer, and he doesn't know anything about military law. He knows like 3 rules. And the one rule they teach you is you don't shoot shipwreck survivors. I mean, it's literally in the junior officer course, like, we're just going to keep you from killing anybody, getting yourself in too much trouble. We teach you that. And, when I looked it up, sadly, it's also, when we're training our dumb lawyers, it says, in case you didn't understand everything we just told you, this is in the Law of War manual, it says, here's an example of a order you should not allow to be given, and it's shooting survivors in the shipwreck survivors.
You're talking about what happened in the Caribbean.
And what's happened in the Caribbean. So I'm really worried that this administration, I know we weren't going to go into it, but since you tapped into this, I worried a lot throughout my career. I was involved in a couple incidents that Spanish prosecutors looked at, to try to see if we'd done anything wrong. I was involved in helping an Army guy not get scooped up in an Interpol event, because he was overseas in a country that adhered to the ICC and Interpol, and we didn't want to test our SOFA agreement, Status of Forces Agreement, about that, because we tend to write things in our Status of Forces Agreements that says, we don't give a shit what the ICC says to you, turn the people back over to us, or our relationship with you's over. And that's one of those ones where, like, we look at them and say, we really mean this one. I'm worried. Coming out of Gaza, I think there's 3,000 or 4,000 Israeli officers enlisted who are probably under monitoring. And I think we're going to have, coming out of Venezuela and Iran, we're going to have a bunch of officers, because the predilection for these international legal forays, these organizations, is if we don't like the war you're doing, then we're going to investigate this much more aggressively than if we do like
And the individuals themselves.
and then the individuals are the victims of it. And I will tell you, I have a lot of Israeli senior officer friends who are very careful about where they travel and how they travel.
Is that right?
Yeah, and yes, and I have I don't want to have a lot of American general officer friends who are captains or commanders who have to worry very carefully about where they travel and how they travel. But we're going to get into that. Now, I'll say I go one further and say the Israelis have set up a special relationship between the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Justice to support those people.
Yeah.
We've never conceived of anything like that, and we need to start thinking about it.
Yeah. Can I just add
Please.
one
Yeah,
more?
please
So
jump in.
the examples I've used in most of our self-policing prosecution and court-martialing has been for individuals who have, killed or directed the killing of civilians. It's on the ground, enlisted, junior enlisted, because aren't soldiers or Marines, because those are the ones that have the kind of contact with civilians and combatants on a regular basis.
Right.
The other category that has not come into play, but could conceivably, particularly if we bombed every bridge and power plant in Iran, which is hyperbole because
Or engage in civilization.
right. I mean that's hyperbole, to be fair, because that's not going to happen. But is airstrikes. And we also abide by the law of armed conflict when developing strike patterns. I've done hundreds, and we look
in the region.
Yes, and we
Throughout
look at
the world.
discrimination. First, make sure that there is a military purpose. It has to be a military target or a dual-use military-civilian target.
Which a bridge or power plant
A bridge
could be.
can't. We destroyed all the bridges in Mosul. Felt very bad about that, but it was
But lawful.
lawfully. Discrimination, proportionality, that you're not using greater force than is necessary, and protection, that you are doing the utmost to preserve human life and minimize suffering. And there's a lot of time and effort that goes into establishing collateral damage estimates. And you might even choose a time of day or day of the week when that will be less in prosecuting something. But if we expand broadly, if we abandon those principles, then I would say there's another category of service members, and in this case, more senior service members, because some of those targets are approved by colonels, generals, 1, 2, 3 stars and above. It's not the same as the guy at the end of the pointed end of the spear with a rifle.
So I just want to be clear, those will be violations of the laws of war, and those would be things where you might hold senior officers accountable for their command authorities.
Conceivably, in this world that Mark has described.
Right.
There are
Okay.
nations that do that. Syria roll a barrel bomb out the back of a helicopter, on top of a helicopter.
Yeah.
Those are some of the people that are being prosecuted now.
I think there's Russian generals that will be prosecuted.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And there's how the Russians have executed that campaign. I think we're very careful about this. I think I think we have a problem when we involve forces that tend to do Title 50 missions in traditional Title
That's
10
intelligence missions.
intelligence missions, but also more than intelligence in that case. Missions where there's some plausible deniability in your
Covert action.
Yeah, covert action, and then pull those same officers back in to do non-covert missions. That's asking a lot of those officers, and I think some have not got it right over time, and not just recently. I mean, over time we've had that problem, but recently I think we've had it as well. I mean, it's something we're going to have to watch very carefully. We have the way this administration executes foreign policy. There may be a lot of rhetoric about loving the military. The actions they do actually put the military in a lot of really tight positions, and I think no one's going to be around to help the military officers involved in this 3 or 4 years from now when they're dealing with a problem.
Yeah. So Les and Tara, this is sort of a final question for you guys, and then I want to go to the audience for questions. You've heard from Admiral Montgomery and General Gibson that in both their views, as former military officers and people who have actually served in positions on Capitol Hill, that Congress really doesn't, shouldn't, can't, but it's a policy and legal matter, have a role in conflict termination. Both of you have been senior staffers on probably the 2 most important committees, maybe leave out armed services, but 2 most important committees on Capitol Hill when it comes to these things, the Foreign Relations Committee, the Intelligence Committee. What's your perspective on whether Congress can, should, ought have a role in conflict termination? Let me start with Tara, and then I'll come to you last.
I mean, I think there is a role for Congress to have. It's the extent to which it exerts that role. getting to my point from the front, is what should Congress do in some of these things? Some of the committees we're talking about, the intelligence committees where I've served, have unique authorities because they're overseeing intelligence activities that don't have oversight elsewhere. And so what are those committees doing? And I think they are exerting those roles to the extent they can. And when what Congress will do. But in terms of reining in,
I think Admiral Montgomery might
No,
disagree
I
with
want to object to I want to object to the way that you described mine and General Gibbs's position. I don't think we said
the way I described
Yeah, the way you
Oh,
did.
okay.
Yeah,
Not you.
not you, Tara, because I think both of us understand Congress has a role. What we were saying, I was saying very specifically, is
Yeah.
in negotiations, that kind of temporal, fast-paced negotiations, they don't.
think I
But
heard it,
clearly,
but okay.
No. I mean, you want to stop a war? It gets exactly what Tara said earlier. I've just cut your appropriations.
Nobody's ever going to do that. That's not real. Nobody's going to take American soldiers.
Except that that's what's
Except it happened in 1973.
And in 1984.
And okay, do we need to do more here?
I-
This is embarrassing.
I don't think that. Well, A, the Bolton Amendment is not actually how it went down. B, the Vietnam War is an example that I think probably
I'm sorry,
rule.
Jamil, who's in power in Nicaragua right now? The same guy who was
No, I understand.
Daniel Ortega
No, I got it. I
was the
understand.
communist
Understand
leader in
it.
1984.
Yeah,
He's
come and
still there
gone.
today.
Yeah, come and gone and come and go.
But it was
All
fine.
right. So sorry, Tara, we interrupted you as you were in the middle of to have this little
I had
fight.
to object.
Yes, to object to my characterization
And I appreciate the clarification.
of Admiral Montgomery
That's
Jones' position.
just in terms of the oversight is happening to some extent. I can speak to the intelligence oversight, and that is happening particularly because there aren't all these public entities that can look at those things as well. But does that mean that the president isn't going to take action because there's oversight happening? That's a different matter. And how is Congress asserting its role? The tools do exist. Budgeting, the appropriations process. To Mark's earlier point, that takes a really long time, and there's instances where the president needs to act quickly. And that's what we're seeing now more and more with presidents exerting their executive power because Congress isn't acting as a larger institutional body, I would say.
So I have a follow-up, unless I want you to weigh in this too, but first for you, Tara. You just saw me and Admiral Montgomery have a back and forth about whether Congress is realistically going to pull funding for American soldiers in the field. You've been in the policy recently. I mean, you were in the policy recently. You should know better than that as a policy leader in the Armed Services Committee. Do you think is there any chance that Congress pulls funding from even an unpopular war in the field, the president's decided to fight while American soldiers are on the battlefield?
I think like a lot of these matters, it depends. There's the overall arching political dynamics. I mean, when you look at the politics right now, the Republicans have all three levers of power and what they would choose to do respective to a member of their party. There are some historical examples right now, but Congress right now hasn't even passed a budget on time, as we know.
That's fair.
So to use that as a tool, the time it could take to do that could really take some time.
You have to actually do your job to use it as a tool.
So there's the practical implication of that where this event could be, much further along when that happens.
Fair.
But the appetite for that, I think, could be low.
The other area, and by the way, there's like kind of different answers depending on the mechanism, and these are very fraught mechanisms, as I was saying, on the congressional role in war powers generally. And one of the things that you and I experienced, Jamil, in the about a decade ago was working for the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who got a request from the president to refine the 9/11 AUMF. The 9/11 AUMF, which is going to be 25 years old here in September, has been the law of the land for 10% of our nation's history and has been the authorizing law for any number of U.S. military actions around the world against terrorist groups who are, use the quotes, associated force connected to Al-Qaeda or the Taliban from 9/11. It's still going on today. It's still going on in Somalia right now, for one example. An amazing thing. Congress passed an AUMF that's 58 words long in 2001, still operative. There's a question about, should it apply to so many groups? Should some Supreme Court decision referencing associated forces with respect to detainee policy be the thing that guides U.S. war powers? Is a very interesting question. We went through an exercise with the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Corker, to find a way to regulate this authorization process.
To be fair, we call that exercise Arctic Camel because you've never seen one. You might want it to exist, but it's not a real thing.
You wrote, with very good guidance, you wrote a bill that was very long with a mechanism for Congress to approve new groups for the AUMF and disapprove groups as they kind of passed out of significance. It was unworkable. It never would have passed. It was kind of this crazy contraption with on-ramps and off-ramps. Point being, politically, and I don't want to belabor this too much, but politically, it's way easier for Congress to do the big thing rather than the nuanced, complex, maybe smart technical thing. So the big thing being the 9/11 AUMF, which Congress very successfully passed. This kind of reform effort, which you designed legally, would have been impossible to actually get through Congress, I think, under almost any circumstance.
But hold on, but isn't it actually easier for Congress to just do nothing, as it done more often than not? I mean, yes, look, after 9/11, it was easy, right? You got 434 votes in the House, right? You got unanimous votes in the Senate. I mean, it was easy to do something. You had to do something after 9/11. It's easier for Congress to take a pass and be like, Mr. President, Madam President, you own it, good luck.
There's truth in that, for sure. Meanwhile, as Tara was saying, Republicans control the House and the Senate. They support Trump's policy. Despite all the amazing flaws, they continue politically to support the policy. They have chosen not to pursue, maybe so, but they have chosen not to actively stop it. Congress has made that decision. And then they get into this crazy double negative because of the War Powers Resolution, which I think is a mechanism that should be removed because it never does what it's supposed to do. But my larger point is, these things, it is very difficult for Congress to get involved. And you go to the appropriations question, it has been tried with related issues, maybe not US troops in the field, but covert action or US support for proxy forces around the world. It is very difficult for Congress to do that. The administration will find a way, because they have very good lawyers and more of them than Congress does, to find a way through the loopholes in whatever Congress writes.
Got it. All right, so we have time for, we have about 15, 20 minutes for questions, so let's go ahead and, I see an audience question back there. We're going to bring you the microphone just so that we can get you on the audio. So give us a second to hustle the
I'm sure I
microphone.
detected that you no longer had a microphone.
I mean, my parents said I swallowed one as a child, so here we go.
Awesome, thank you. On that last point regarding the appropriations, and this is for both Admiral Montgomery and Mr. Munson to sort of address this point. I'm wondering, even if Congress is able to pass an appropriations rider limiting a certain covert or special action, what's to stop Trump from turning to a foreign or private funder to fund that action anyways? We already saw in the fall during the government shutdown, he accepted a private donation to fund the military for a couple of weeks.
An American, to be fair.
And well, it was anonymous, do we know? The Qatari funding of Air Force One, the private funding of the new wing of the White House, which has been stalled in court. It seems to me very unclear as to what mechanism exists to Trump going to one of his foreign buddies or to a private funder to fund that covert action.
This was exactly the issue in the 80s with support for the Contras. It was exactly this issue.
It was literally the Iran-Contra.
It was the Iran-Contra affair. The Congress restrained the president's ability to act in Nicaragua by supporting the Contras, which were the rebel group fighting the communist government in Managua. And so the president and his staff went to private funders, both foreign governments and Americans, to fund the Contras, and it worked.
They sold them. They sold Iran weapons.
Well, that's a separate issue, which actually did get the hostages out, by the way. Ask Lawrence Jenko, the priest from Joliet, Illinois, and I remember him being free. Maybe that worked. Also, it was a lot cheaper than whatever Obama paid for that guy in Afghanistan.
Still though.
But getting back to the main point, which is there is nothing stopping the president from making those arrangements. He is in charge of U.S. foreign policy under the Constitution. Go back and look at the debate in the Constitutional Convention, where they talked about the kind of powers the president would have. He is the one who makes foreign policy. He receives ambassadors from other countries. He is free to talk to other governments in the way he wants to. It is virtually unlimited for all practical purposes. So that is not really something Congress can do. Congress does have the power of the purse for taxpayer dollars, and in theory, every dollar spent by the U.S. government. And so there's a question here:
except for TSA, in which case they don't.
Stop it. Does the funding come from a foreign government to the US government and then to the entity? Congress may have a role. If it goes straight from a foreign funder or an American citizen straight to the recipient, probably Congress doesn't have a role.
But could not Congress say, for instance, then, and Tara, know this, say we will no longer fund entity X if they are conducting Y with foreign dollars? There might not be anything that, you know.
They can do that, but what I've seen us do is fence other money.
Yeah.
I mean, the number one way to
Punish them in a different way.
change
Yeah.
behavior is fence travel money for the Secretary of Defense, right? I mean, I think that's how we got ourselves out of the support to the Saudis and the Yemenis, you know, the refueling support to the Saudis and Yemenis.
When you say fence, you mean
the Saudis and UAE for attacking us, where we prohibit that. So Congress has tricks on small stuff. What's flummoxed us recently is this accidental appearance of $150 billion in reconciliation money with almost no string. You know, all of Congress's worst fears came true when this money just sat there and the president's used it for just about anything.
Sorry, can you say more about what do you mean by that?
So there's $150 billion in authorized appropriated reconciliation money, but very.
Where did that come from?
That came from the reconciliation bill.
Technically not appropriated.
Yeah, not appropriated, right? Authorized, but existed, right? Yeah, it's spendable.
It does exist. Yeah.
So
it's like an accounting trick where they found money.
I don't know if it's an accounting trick,
Yeah.
but it's a mechanism by which, when you control all the levers of power, you can produce some legislative and financial windfall. And they're going to do it again. But the $150 billion
I
was
want that
spent.
trick.
Well, the $150 billion was spent, and it may go back to its original purpose.
Yeah.
But it was repurposed to make payments to soldiers. Instead of you mentioned there's an offer of a donation. I think in the end, the president, OMB, repurposed reconciliation money
The lawyers got involved
to actually pay for that. I acknowledge the gift of the jet and everything; those are different things. But for the purposes, so unfortunately, under this president, because of the multi-year nature of this money, he's probably going to have the ability to do almost whatever he wants, dollar-wise. Within reason, because I think there's going to be another 100 to 150 billion reconciliation.
Should that
if not 200?
Should that encourage Congress to not engage in those some sort of reconciliation?
I would
procedures?
promise you the appropriators do not this is I don't want to get into all the business of the Congress, but the appropriators despise one of the reasons we can't build munitions properly is appropriators won't give multi-year authorization for 20 years. They finally, after all the lessons we learned, they don't trust us, 4 different groups of people. They don't trust 4 different groups of people. Services, the military services, the defense industrial base, the department leadership, and themselves, right? They think all 4 of those groups will somehow screw it up if you give them any flexibility and appropriations. And by the way, reconciliations is one large, gigantic flexibility. So a little bit off the topic here, but just to understand, right now is not the time you're going to be able to influence the president easily with appropriations.
Other questions? Sir, in the front.
Thank you. Some great comments by the panel on how feckless Congress is in terms of oversight. I have a question for you, Ms. McFeely, fellow Fletcher grad, by the way. And that is, if you were to take an example from any major power that does it better than us, where we could learn some best practices.
China.
Is there any?
Interesting. My co-panelist here is subtly saying China. I think, and that's what, the United States Congress and the Senate specifically is the largest deliberative body, and it takes time to make these decisions, and that's why we see this slow responsiveness. And as we look at the structure and the definitions of structures in Article 1 of the Constitution and Article 2, and with the President as Commander-in-Chief, designed in that way by the framers to be able to be responsive in emergencies and other crises, because Congress as a large body does not have the means to do that. So I don't know if there's any models. Maybe there's some aspiring students here who are working on some new proposals, but that's sort of the perennial challenge. But on the observing that process, and I think some of my colleagues here have served on the Hill, we've been involved in very challenging debates on language in bills in a good way, where there's a strong dialectic to really make law better, and that takes time. And so some of these things, I think, as Mark's pointing to, the reconciliation bill, which is the one big beautiful bill that passed this summer, happened very quickly in a very bipartisan manner. Some of that dialectic doesn't happen in these instances, and so it impacts the actual result of the bill as it's enacted into law. So that's sort of a roundabout answer to your question, but I think it's just some core issues.
Great. Next question.
Yeah, so just kind of the point being made about sort of the double negative of Congress failing to disapprove of the war. You know, our view can just be, oh, well, let's just fail to terminate it earlier than the 60-day limit of the war powers resolution, which that 60-day limit is actually approaching, either a week or a couple of days. Again, it might depend on whether you count the ceasefire as ending and not vice versa. But I guess kind of a broader question is, if the war powers resolution, hypothetically, is ignored by a president and it goes beyond the 60 days, as far as I know, there's no actual sort of self-enforcing aspect of the war powers resolution that removes funding or has any kind of consequence. But like, realistically speaking, what consequences are there? If not for the president, probably not. But even for servicemen who follow orders or give orders to conduct military affairs after the war powers resolution, like, does that potentially open them up to any kind of liability that'll resolve the question even of whether the war powers resolution is even constitutional? I'm just kind of curious what the actual consequences of violating it hypothetically even are, and what resolution might come out of it.
Last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm certainly not qualified to give you an answer on the legal liability question. It seems to me almost impossible. I'll give you my opinion anyway. It seems to me almost impossible that would have a deleterious effect on service members in the field following orders from the elected commander-in-chief, et cetera. The war powers resolution is, in my mind, for whatever it's worth, an example of Congress trying to address this question of presidential war powers in a way that is utterly unsuccessful, and again, has the opposite intent of what they were shooting for. No president has acknowledged the constitutionality of the war powers resolution. There might be one exception to that. They all comply in that they send the letter to Congress saying, hey, the clock is ticking because we did this thing out in the field with guns, et cetera. But no president will follow through on letting Congress use that mechanism to stop him from doing what he feels he needs to do to defend the United States. That is his job. That is the presidential system we have. A different model would be a parliamentary system where you could remove the parliamentary body could remove the leader. Oftentimes, the only other option for Congress is to impeach and remove. That was discussed in the Iran-Contra affair. And it goes to this whole question that Jamil brought up of did the president know that money from the sale of missiles to Iran was being used for the Contras? Did he know of the diversion? Then leading Democrats said we would have to start impeachment proceedings. They controlled Congress then. It ended up being determined through an investigation that the president did not know about the diversion. So Democrats did not pursue the impeachment. I think they knew that the whole time, that he was not, that impeachment wasn't going to work. This is the problem the Democrats faced, and Republicans arguably, although the Lewinsky thing was certainly not a foreign policy issue. The first impeachment of President Trump was a foreign policy issue. He was, accused of mismanaging, illegally managing foreign assistance funds for Ukraine. The remedy that the majority in Congress saw was the impeachment mechanism. That didn't work either. It is a very, very difficult thing to constrain the president on these foreign policy and national security issues. Great. By the way, the one other kind of fun fact about war powers, every time the president has asked Congress for a declaration of war, Congress has given it to him every single time. I think it's 8 for 8. The AUMF process, much more fraught, much less successful, legislatively with Congress.
I'm not sure we're looking at 9 for 9 this year, though.
I don't think the request is coming.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, all of you, by the way. So this is for Admiral Montgomery or anyone else who thinks they can join in. I was wondering if you could talk more about Title 50 versus Title 10 operations, how that balance may have been shifted in recent years, or if it has shifted, and how that would kind of impact the aftermath of conflict.
Yeah. So I'm not a lawyer.
But you'll play one on TV?
No. I'm not a lawyer, but I've watched a lot, authorized a lot of operations, and there's a level of risk management in Title 50 operations. If you ever read the book Lone Survivor, you'll see them make a bad risk management decision about allowing people who spotted them to leave. It cost 4 or 5 team members their lives. I think our special operators on missions deep behind enemy lines have challenging decisions to make about what happens when their identity and/or location is compromised. And if they choose to do nothing, they will probably have retribution against them. And in the case of that SEAL unit, that SEAL team unit, I think 4 out of 5 people died, or 5 out of 6. Other places, I believe units take action so that they're not compromised. There's a level of the term I think we would use is, their ability, your decision making about the restraint you'll use, how much quarter you'll give is different in that kind of operation. And I think this would apply to Title 50 forces as well. Title 10 forces.
And that's appropriate.
The forces doing normal military operations, there should never be a question of quarter. There is never a discussion, there is never, the risk management, the risk balance is such that quarter is not an issue. And I think that's the challenge we have in this. And it's hard, we don't talk about this, you don't see it written about. Our JAGs who opine on just about fucking everything will not talk about this very much, but it's a hard thing. I think we're going to learn a lot in the next 2 to 3 years when some recently retired, fired Judge Advocate Generals begin to talk about what their experiences were in Southcom and SOCOM. Not CENTCOM. Again, CENTCOM is a normal military force. I agree completely with how General Gibson's characterized targeting in CENTCOM, in UCOM, and PACOM, which is an extremely deliberate process. I mean, I laugh when people tell me Claude's involved. I'm like, Claude hasn't met a lawyer, right? Because Claude can go fast as heck, and that lawyer's going to be like, yeah, I'll be back. I'll get back to you. So I mean, we're going to have to make some hard decisions about how we treat Judge Advocate Generals. I think the current Secretary of Defense, and I do mean Secretary of Defense, has 100% misunderstood the role of Judge Advocate Generals and General Consuls in the Department of Defense, and he has removed very competent officers for no reason, and we are much the worse for wear for it, and it's gonna leave a mark on legal review and on legal performance for a decade by his personal bad judgment.
We have time for
I hope that answers the question.
Wait, we have time for one last question.
So we've talked a lot about conventional uses of force. Is there anything in this discussion that is fundamentally different about an operation in cyberspace?
Yeah.
Is the analysis the same? Should it be the same? Or are we talking about something that's fundamentally different?
I will say, so I had a couple years at U.S. Cyber Command, and in developing cyber targets, those same law of armed conflict parameters governed that. And in developing potential targets against electricity plants, for instance, I would think about babies and incubators. Who is going to be affected when we shut off the power because of this plant? I think those principles aren't waived just because it's not a kinetic strike. Nor am I aware, of course I've been retired a couple years, of anyone who has argued that those should not apply.
And in fact, I think it's harder. I gotta be honest, I mean, I don't know how you felt about it, but certainly the problem comes in, like, I can explain a kinetic explosion. They'll give me a CEP, a blast radius, an exact amount of damage every 10 meters you move away from it. And at some point you look at the lawyer and say, this stuff's good, let's go. On the cyber one, it's much harder. There's a, what happens if this happens? What happens? And we don't have the practical engineering experience of having attacked this exact transformer, supporting this exact kind of power, because it only exists in one place in the world at that moment that we happen to be attacking, and trying to explain the collateral impact, the collateral duty was so much harder that in the end, I'll be honest, if in the time that my kinetic guys could go to Wright-Patterson and Hawaii and get kinetic, they could get 700 targets, suitcased, completely done, reviewed, before I could get one cyber one done.
At the end of the day, it's easier to just drop a bomb on the building that has the cyber target inside it.
And what's crazy is if the bomb misses, it does more damage than if the cyber attack misses. But we presume a likelihood of miss to be, a certain percentage. I mean, that's what's crazy about it. We do it to ourselves, but on the other hand, I would hate to be somewhere where we said, take down this transformer, it only affects these 3 buildings, and the city goes dark, and all the incubators turn off, and all the respirators turn off, and you kill an extra 1,000 people.
I'll just say one thing, and then I'll turn off the mic because I know there are other comments. The new cyber strategy, the administration's new cyber strategy, indicates a willingness to be far more aggressive than we have been in the past. But to this point, the risk aversion for cyber strikes has been so much higher than kinetic. You can put a private on a gate with an M16 and he's authorized to take a human life. But I remember the day when if you wanted to, someone's going to get a Formula 404 error if they go to that website, that was SecDef approval. Now that's been pushed way down, but I mean, I just use that as an example of some real world risk calculus for cyber strikes versus, it's loosened, but it's still, we're far more willing to use kinetic force.
By the way, Congress fixed that, not the administration. Congress passed a law that made, I was working on the SAS when we wrote it, it made cyber surveillance and reconnaissance a traditional military activity, overriding the intelligence community's long-standing efforts to keep the military out. And within about 2 days of it passing, so you knew this was a deal we had, and a National Security Presidential Memorandum 13 was signed, which allegedly, I only go by what's said in the open press, allegedly is a National Security Presidential Memorandum that frames how you can and will do offensive cyber operations campaigns by military forces.
An issue that may have been debated ostensibly in the executive branch since 2007 for over a decade. When we first encountered it.
We're already behind. The Ukrainians allegedly just fought a battle with no humans, all robots conducting the battle. I presume we're going to be doing that pretty soon. Notably, in the Obama administration, the justification for not seeking congressional authorization for the use of force in Libya was that no Americans were in harm's way in the exercise. So if you think we're in a bad spot now on the role of Congress and authorizing war powers and military activity, it's only going to get much more complicated and much worse.
Well, there you have it, folks. The real question about how you terminate war with robots. So thanks to our panel for being here. Thanks to all of you for being here.